Alright, everybody, we're about to be here for a minute, so strap yourselves in. We're doing my top 100 favorite albums chart. It's been a while. The last time I made one of these charts was 2017, and I never made a video about it. I've never done videos for any of my favorite charts. A lot of people have asked me to update it, and I figured this is a great way to go about it, because I know a lot of people are curious about my musical taste, especially after I did some of those music tier lists. If you want to make something like this, neverendingchartrendering.org is the website where I made this chart. It's a top 100 template, very easy to use. You just type in the name of an album and plug it in. So we're going to go through this bad boy, and I've made a lot of changes, as I always do, because I always try to keep these as current as possible. It's not just my favorite albums of all time, because there's a lot of albums that at some point I might have considered my favorite. Now I don't listen to it at all anymore. I don't even like it. So I try to keep these to, what I currently consider my favorite albums, what I still return to and listen to somewhat regularly and still have a lot of fondness for. So if if something that used to be at the top isn't there anymore or something like that, it just means I probably am not really listening to it the way I used to. So let's go ahead and get right in. My number one favorite album is still Ex-Military by Death Grips. It's just so much fucking fun to listen to. It's so intense and full. Every track really just pummels you with a full depth of sound, and Death Grips has done a lot more interesting and experimental stuff after this album. I mean, I love basically all of their music. They have not released an album I did not like to date, but Ex-Military is the one that I return to more regularly. I won't even say that it's their necessarily, most interesting project. Like, some of their later stuff might not be as easy to listen to, but it is more engaging in certain ways. But every track on Ex-Military is just so fucking memorable, stays in my iPod, on my shuffle. The first, 5 tracks are all some of my favorite songs of all time. So, yeah, I can't help but keep it at the number one slot, because I don't get tired of it. It's not something I throw on every single day. It is pretty intense. It's good in the car. It's good at the gym. It's good if you are just in that mood. But, every time I throw it on, I have a good time. So, staying in the top slot. Next up, Denzel Curry's Taboo. I slept on Denzel Curry for way too long, even though I was a big fan of Threats and certain other tracks from his other albums. It wasn't until 2017, late 2017, when I started smoking weed, that I started listening to his stuff more intently and just got way into it. And when he released Taboo last year, it basically was like the ultimate, ultimate. It was the ultimate Denzel Curry experience. I mean, I almost didn't want to consider it my favorite of his albums. We're going to get to another one soon that I conceptually enjoy even more, but Taboo is just track for track so fucking on point. Every song is good. Every song is a single, basically. And I tend to like this type of album. We're going to see a lot of this as we go. Albums where just every song as a standalone is just incredible. And I think it's rare to find albums like that. I think most albums that are more of a song collection don't have the strength of concept to be as listenable as an album, or just don't have, such consistently amazing songs. Like, there's plenty of albums that are not on my top 100 list that have, say, 4 or 5 songs I absolutely love. 4 or 5 songs that I consider to be masterpieces, and then the rest of it I could take or leave. Taboo, Ex-Military, these are albums where every track I'm like, fuck, I love that song. We'll definitely come back to it. I just realized an album that's going to be missing from my list. It wouldn't be in the top rungs, but I'll talk about it when we get to the bottom rungs. It's hard for me to do these because I'm lazy about downloading music, so a lot of the time I will just have stuff that I only listen to really on YouTube, and I totally forget about it, which is why I was hesitant to make this list, and now that I've remembered something, whatever. Anyway, Taboo, fucking great, gorgeous, beautiful Taboo, always with a lot on our mind. Yeah, super memorable fucking album. Next up, back in the top, I've put Francis the Mute by the Mars Volta. Now, Mars Volta was my favorite band in my teen years. They were basically my introduction to, experimental music, to all the crazier shit that I started listening to, prog and all that shit. It's funny because at the time, I considered the Mars Volta to be pretty fucking out there, but I always just assumed that there was plenty of music like it that existed that I just didn't know about. But I really think the Mars Volta is kind of in a world of their own. Like, the particular clash of genres and sounds and sonic styles that comes out of the mind of Omar Rodriguez Lopez, I don't think can be duplicated. I don't think it's quite the same as anything else out there. There's stuff that it's, similar to. I mean, if you listen to a lot of like jazz fusion and prog rock, then it's not like this would be alien to you, but there's nothing quite like the Mars Volta. And, the more time has passed, the more I've appreciated that, the more I've returned to it and been like, fuck, I still haven't found something that hits all the right notes for me in this way. And also, like, they're just so, I almost didn't realize how heavy they are in a way. Like, my brother Victor surprised me one time by revealing that he had always considered them a metal band. And when I listened to them, it is interesting how, I guess because of their hardcore, post-hardcore roots, there is a much harder edge to their music than most of what you would get from, say, jazz fusion or prog rock. Which appeals to me as somebody who grew up with hard rock music. So, I think that's, kind of what got me in, was that they had that somewhat more intense sound, but then also have all these crazy experiments, are able to be really soft, and then, the sheer number of layers to their music. When you're in the right mindset to peel all that back, it is magical. It feels impossible sometimes, the way that their songs are structured. When you just think about how could somebody have written this, how could somebody have put together all this stuff and figured out that this would sound good, that this would elicit these emotions. The riffs that Omar comes up with are just so different from anything that anyone else has ever made that it's a little mind-boggling. Particularly what made me put this back up was listening to it on acid. Me and Zen Huxtable tripped acid and listened to Cassandra Gemini, the 32-minute track that ends this album. That's easily one of my favorite songs of all time. And that song alone would be enough to make this album one of my favorites, because it is, in fact, the length of another entire album, despite the fact that it's less than half of this one. But, this album, hugely important to me. That track in particular, just when I was on acid, I was able to pick apart every single layer of what was happening and really appreciate it. And it was just this song that I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of times, that sometimes I put on this album, and if I'm not in the right headspace, it's just white noise to me because I've heard it so much. But when I really concentrate on it, play it at a high volume, and listen to every detail, it's still magical. So that's why it's made it back up onto my list from being in the sort of the weeds before. Acid Rap by Chance the Rapper. This is another one where it's just every fucking song is killer, with the exception of Smoke Again, which is just okay. I don't like Absol's verse on it, but otherwise it's fine. But yeah, just killer track after killer track, such a unique vibe that Chance doesn't have anymore. Not to say that I have anything wrong with his sort of more soulful sound, his using an actual backing band as opposed to just hip-hop production, but Acid Rap's vibe was what I liked so much about him. Hearing him do the softer songs, the more soulful stuff, just doesn't work for me. It's not my type of music the way that Acid Rap is. Acid Rap, again, is a densely layered album, lots of weird shit going on in the instrumentals with his odd vocal inflections, his weird voices, his fucking that he does all the time. All that stuff is great, and I love it. And again, this is another one where there's just a bunch of my favorite songs occurring on this album. Every track is good, and also a bunch of them are favorites. So yeah, just great album. Every track could be a single, once again. Next up, Isis Oceanic. This album has it's funny, this has never been like my favorite album, but it's just been so consistently good for me that I can't help but put it in my top 10. It's like it's one of those that I just return to always, and I always feel great about it. It's got this particular sort of sonic texture to it. So ISIS is a post-metal band. They were originally a sludge band, and they sort of pioneered the idea of post-metal in the era of post-rock. And Oceanic is an album that sounds like going into the ocean and dissolving and dying. And it's got just these amazing drum tones in particular, like the way the drums sound are so spacious and airy. I love all the tonality on this album is fantastic. Just the songs are lengthy dirges that you can get lost in. It's just like, it's great for background music, and it's great for listening to it, and it's a great bedtime album. Like, it's good for any circumstance you need it in. I feel like it's just an album that's always been there for me. It's very sturdy, you know, and like, there's other good ISIS albums. Panopticon's probably my second favorite, but like, something about Oceanic, I think it might be the strength of concept, the fact that it is so ocean focused that it accomplishes that vibe so well. The fact that there's a decent variety across the album too, where, you know, a song like Wait that is got like the female vocals, and it's more of a like post-rock song, a little bit lighter. Then you've got From Sinking, which has this really crunchy sound to it, and then a song like Him that's like euphoric at the end. And then the earlier part of the album is a bit more crushing and brutal. The beginning and the end, the first track is just really memorable. It's got this riff that stays in my head all the time. The opening drum beat, the ta-ta-ta, ding, 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 like that plays in my mind all the time. So yeah, great fucking album. Next up, and I've been placing them higher on the list every time. Maximum the Hormone with Buiki Kaisu. This is just the best fucking nu metal album of all time. And like, I grew up with nu metal, and nu metal, a lot of it is not aged well. I mean, a lot of it was cringe-inducing even at the time. It's edgy, self-serious music. Well, what's great about Maximum the Hormone is they don't take it seriously at all. And it's almost wholesome to me. Like, listening to this album makes me feel warm inside, because it feels like something from my childhood realized to its full potential. Every song on here is super catchy, super memorable, and their sort of particular sound is that they go between like a heavier nu metal sound and like straight J-pop choruses and stuff like that. Straight bubblegum, fun bits, and also like punk rock sounds, because they began as more of a hardcore punk band. This album's just so eclectic. It's another one where every track could be a single. They're all just phenomenal tracks that are all catchy, all memorable. And just the fact that the subject matters are so goofy and playful, the fact that there's 3 different singers, so they're, you know, bringing all these different styles and inflections into it. You know, there's the clean singing, the female vocals, and the really weird screamed vocals that don't sound like anything else. Lots of memorable riffs. This is basically like, you know, if you were into bands like System of a Down, Mindless Self-Indulgence even is a big influence on them. Korn, like Slipknot, all that kind of stuff is all kind of mixed together in here, and I think this is the pinnacle of that genre, that sound. So yeah, lovely album. Next up, Rat King, So It Goes. This is another one, just every track is fucking great, and it's got a really unique sound. New York hip-hop from a couple of very young MCs at the time. Wiki, who is extremely technical and really talented and has a very interesting voice for being a guy who was like 19 or so when this album came out. And Hawk, who is also interesting because he raps and sings. He's got a beautiful singing voice, in my opinion. And the producer, Sporting Life, has this very distinctive sound where the beats are... they're hard-nosed, they're kind of noisy, but rather than being heavy, he goes for like this washed-out, kind of dreamy sound, sort of similar to Dialect. And as he put it, he would sort of go around New York and just like listen to all the different sounds in the environment and then try to like replicate having that many tracks in the songs, like try to sort of create a soundscape that felt like being out in the middle of New York. And I think it gives the whole album a really cool vibe. It's super great, and unfortunately Rat King only ever put out like one other little short mixtape, and then I think they basically dissolved. So this is really all you get from them, and it's legendary. I wish it would have gotten a lot more attention than it did, because I think it's fantastic. Next up, Jeff Rosenstock with Worry, and I used to have We Cool in my top 10, but ultimately Worry it's not as consistent of an album. There's not any songs I dislike on this album. There's just a few that aren't as memorable, but the hits are just so damn good. Songs like, what's it even called? I'm trying to remember the song that's like, whoa, whoa, oh, whoa, whoa, oh. That one, and Wave Goodnight to Me are both great singles, but then you get into the back half of this album, which is basically a bunch of mini songs that all go into each other. Like each one just flows directly into the next for like 20 minutes, and it's fucking awesome. It's like listening to like the big tracks on American Idiot, like Jesus of Suburbia, which was always like my favorite Green Day track. Like I love the idea of the big 9-minute multiphasic punk song, but Jeff Rosenstock is just a way better fucking songwriter. It's way less straightforward and simplistic. The different parts are more interesting, more varied. They're cut shorter. Each part is only as long as it needs to be, and it flows so beautifully. It's just like the ultimate long punk rock song, basically. And yeah, I mean, lately I've been listening to a little bit less Jeff Rosenstock. I was listening to a whole lot of it back in 2017. It was like the first thing that I got May into out of my music, so we were listening to a lot of it together. But these days, I'm like too happy for it. Like his music is all very depressing. It's all about being in sort of a depressive state of mind. And like when I listen to it now, I just kind of feel sorry for him almost. But yeah, nonetheless, great fucking album. Next up, another mainstay of my top favorites, Mean Everything to Nothing by Manchester Orchestra. Once again, another album where almost every single track is great. This one fell a little bit just because there are more songs that I'm lukewarm about than some of these other albums. But I love the vibe. I consider this a very blue album. I'm sure the cover art contributes to that, but in the music videos. But it has this this feeling of like it's a somber album, but it's a heavy album. Like it sounds like emo. There was somebody who called it once muscular post-emo, and I thought that was a really interesting phrase for it. Like it's got the same energy, the same emotions as like the emo rock, like pop punk style of the mid 2000s, but just while being a lot heavier and a lot bigger of a sound. The fact that they have like, orchestral elements and stuff, and songs that really explode into something epic, like I've never been able to get into like My Chemical Romance because I love songs like Helena. I love the bigness of a track like that, but most of their music is just too chugging riffs straightforward. It's too just like you don't get that kind of stuff from Manchester Orchestra. They come up with more unique, interesting sounds and riffs. The opening track on this, The Only One, is fantastic. Lots of other songs. My Friend Marcus, which has this really dreamy, like carousel kind of feel to it. Overall, just a really fantastic album. And then another one of my former number ones, Suman Ne by Shinsei Kamate-chan. This is a tortured pop rock album. The funny thing is, Shinsei Kamate-chan always describes themselves as being basically just pop music, but with really depressive lyrics, which is underselling it completely. It's like straightforward pop rock music, but it sounds like fuck because the jangly guitars are unkempt and washed out, and you have these keyboards that are just going ape shit over top of everything, playing crazy arpeggios and multi-layered shit, and just these twinkling soundscapes that are overpowering and almost nightmarish, even though they're pretty at the same time. And the vocals by Noko are the lyrics are things like him just screaming, "I want to die, I don't want to die, I want to die, I want to die, 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 die," in his insane, keyless, manic shrieks. And it was super, super relatable music to me when I discovered it back in 2010, because it's all music about sort of being a NEET, being an abnormal person, and struggling with entering adulthood, and I was doing all those things at the time, so it was very relatable. Tsumanne was always my favorite. It just has the highest percentage of great songs on it. It's sort of their slower, more contemplative album as compared to Minna Shine, which came out at the same time, which is also great, but it's funny because Tsumanne has sort of caught on Mew a little bit. Like, I see it around, but all their albums from 2010 are all good. So I would recommend checking out, Minna Shine and Tomodachi yo Koroshite Made, I think is the name of their first one, To Kill a Friend. All fantastic albums, but Tsumanne is the best. Been sitting on my favorites for quite some time. I think I did a rant about Shinsei Kamate-chan recently, so check that out if you want to know more. Next up, Silversun Pickups Carnival. This one, it's not quite in my top 10 because there are a few songs that I find kind of redundant, kind of skippable, just not as memorable as the others. But the song, it's a long album, and there's a lot of really fantastic fucking tracks on here. Lazy Eye is one of my favorite songs of all time. Melatonin is fucking an amazing way to open an album. Just this chugging dreamscape of... this band is basically shoegaze rock music. Like, there's shoegaze, but not as... not quite as dreamy as like a My Bloody Valentine. They're a little bit more radio friendly, a little bit more like, a little bit more straightforward than most shoegaze, but they just got the songwriting chops. Like, fucking Well Thought Out Twinkles is like, just a fucking banger of a rock song that rules. Little Lover So Polite, fucking phenomenal. Common Reactor towards the back end of the album is a noisy, dreamy, fun song. Like, they have this way of creating like a firm backbeat that you really can groove to, and then putting the dream layers on top. It helps that the vocals are really good too, and the fact that they use, instead of a rhythm guitar, a keyboard that's tuned to sound like a rhythm guitar, which creates a very unique style. Their bassist is also incredible. Just, yeah, all around great songwriting. It's unfortunate they never made another great album. Carnival is the only one that's really good, but it's fantastic. Next up, we have MGMT's Congratulations. This is psychedelic pop rock music that is fucking insane. MGMT, their first album, they had put a lot of like psychedelic pop songs that got really fucking popular. They got a lot of radio play, Electric Feel, fucking Time to Pretend, songs like that, Kids. And I like those songs. I'm not the biggest fan of that album. Congratulations is where they really just opened up and became super experimental, involving all these really unique song structures. I think that's what I like the most about this album, is that most of the songs have such distinctive feels. Like, there's nothing else quite like any one track on this album. Even if songs like It's Working or Song for Dan Tracy or Something's Missing aren't like songs I'd put on my favorites list, just the fact that they have such unique vibes and this album has such a good flow, keeps me coming back to it. But then there's a few songs that are some of my favorites, particularly Flash Delirium and Congratulations are both two of my favorite songs ever, for sure. Again, just very uniquely structured, particularly Flash Delirium has this really weird sense of build up to it that is very exciting. And then you got songs like Siberian Breaks. That's like a 12-minute multi-part, multi-phasic kind of epic. I love their lyrics. I love the sort of weird sarcastic but not so easily interpreted style of it. There's a lot to chew on with this album, and again, just so easy to re-listen to because nothing else really sounds like it. It's always worth coming back to for its unique vibe. Next up, Anamanaguchi, Endless Fantasy. I think I did a rant about Anamanaguchi in my last batch, but it's just pummeling, fucking fun chiptune rock music. Every track is super uplifting, super gratifying to listen to. The album's long as shit, so you can just throw it on a car ride or throw it on if you need to concentrate. I like to listen to it when I edit and stuff like that. Just, it's a peppy burst of energy with tons and tons of memorable melodies that I, have in my head forever. Even though the songs with vocals are probably my favorites, Japan Air and Prom Night, but nonetheless, all the instrumental stuff is also great. One of the few, mostly instrumental albums that I absolutely love, just because the melodies are all so fucking memorable that it's as good as if someone sang them. Alright, Coheed and Cambria, The Second Stage Turbine Blade. This one goes back with me. This one I've just been listening to since I was a teenager, and I can't stop. And it's weird. I feel almost a sense of embarrassment about being as into Coheed and Cambria as I am. Because, I know they're not the most respected band. Their last 4 albums or so have all sucked ass. I don't like anything after... Really, Year of the Black Rainbow's okay, but I don't like anything after that, and I'm not a huge fan of that album. But all their first 4... I like, particularly 1, 2, and 4, and Second Stage Turbine Blade I just can't get enough of. It's got such a distinctive vibe. It's like Coheed and Cambria was basically a prog band who was influenced by post-hardcore music, who accidentally made kind of an emo album at the time when emo was at its height. And so that's what they got associated with. And it's mostly just because of the fact that Claudio Sanchez has such a high-pitched falsetto that he sings in. And they have that kind of mathiness to their music, but it's more like prog than math rock. It's not super complicated riffs or anything. It's more about interesting chord progressions, time signatures, stuff like that. But I just love the way these songs are constructed. I feel like Claudio spent a lot of time with each of these tracks. As evidenced by the fact that some of them existed for years before this album came out as Shibu T, as demos that were floating around. And, I think he just spent so much time polishing each one to be a complete experience. Each track feels like a story into itself that has, an arc to it. And of course, the album is a concept album, as all their albums are. And, knowing the concept also helps. But, just the whole album has such a natural flow. There's so many big emotions in this story. Interesting riffs. And I love the sound of it. None of the Coheed albums are very well produced. And this one is the remaster of, they had released it initially, it sounded like shit. Then they released it again, and it still sounded like shit, but it was better. But I think it works the best on this one, where on their other albums, they're trying to create an epic sound that sometimes is kind of hamstrung by the production. This album is so much more low-key and personal, and it feels more emotional and not really so much of an epic drama, that the lo-fi production kind of works for it. And I don't know, man. I can't get enough of it. I've been listening to it nonstop since I was a teenager. It was my favorite album for a very long time, and it still holds up for me. It's hard for me to really talk about because I feel as though if I got in, if I listened to Coheed and Cambria today, I don't know if I would immediately be a huge fan of it. I don't know if this is music that if this album came out yesterday and I listened to it, would I have immediately clicked with it the way I do today? It's hard for me to say. But I can't stop coming back to it no matter how much time passes, no matter how played out it is. I've listened to it thousands of times. So sometimes I listen to it and it sounds like nothing to me, but it's just an album that I can reliably always put on, which is why I listen to it so many times. There is no mood I can be in where this album doesn't fit. The only reason I don't listen to it constantly is that I just get sick of hearing it, But yeah, it's still great in my mind. Next up, Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. You know, I had this in my top 10 before because I love this album so much conceptually. I love what it represents. I love the feeling of it. I love that it's this incredibly maximal sounding, over the top, insanely epic album about just being an out of control, debaucherous bad guy. About, you know, setting out to have fun, but your idea of fun is just being, just embracing your hedonistic tendencies and then dealing with the repercussions of that and having to face yourself as a person who, you know, has this inside of them, this duality of appreciating that you are a piece of shit, but also, you know, that being who you are. It's just such a great, like, villain album in a way, but not one that's proud of itself. It's great for if you're in a depressive, drunken state, is the best way to listen to it. But it also just has a ton of classic songs. Power, All of the Lights. All of the Lights is my favorite, personally, especially with the intro. It's just the perfect, like, again, over-the-top pop song, which really, like, if I had to characterize what most of my favorite albums are, it's songs that have, like, fairly catchy traditional structures, but are just so over-the-top, so unique, so loaded with detail that they become something else, which is what I've hoped to capture in a lot of my music. You know, if you've listened to albums like Gay and Dead, I was very much going for that. But yeah, this one, the only thing that holds it back is that there are a few tracks that I think are just like a little too long, a little difficult to listen to on their own. Like, this is a great album experience, but even then, it's a long album. I don't know if it needed to be as long as it is. Sometimes it kind of repeats itself. There's not really a unique concept to every single track on here. So ultimately, the really standout ones end up overshadowing the other ones. Like, would I ever take, say, Hell of a Life over Runaway? No. But, I don't begrudge the song. I still think it's a good song. Just, it holds it back from being quite in my top 10, but damn, such a fucking vibe of an album. All right, next up, we've got 32 Zell Planet Shrooms, the most underrated Denzel Curry project. This was released as a double EP, but it's really just an album. I think maybe releasing it that way confused a lot of people, but like, it's funny because the conceit of the album is basically that it goes between a dark and light phase, and generally all of Denzel Curry's albums, with the exception of the new one, Zoo, which is just kind of a Miami Bangers collection, I guess, most of them have some kind of transitionary element, where they usually go from dark to light, though in the case of Taboo, it's light to dark. But this one does it the best of them all, and it's 7 tracks of each side, so you have the dark descent that begins. Basically, what I love so much about this album is every track is about something different. Each one is a different layer of the feelings that Denzel has going on in his life. It's basically a portrait of everything surrounding him at this particular moment in 2015 and how he's feeling and the world he's in, but explored from a different lens in each track, which all have very different sounds to them. Like, each one is a different style of song, a different confluence of influences, and he's somebody who's very much likes to take, the things that influence him and combine them in some way. So, like, when you're on the 32 Zell side, you start with songs that are just like about living in South Florida, all the crime and all the crazy shit going on around him. Then you start getting more into his mindset as he has to deal with his personal enemies, people who are trying to, come at him. Then tracks like Ice Age, that's about like his dark relationships that he gets into, his dark feelings towards women and stuff at the time, and all of these are super catchy, super memorable, fun songs. Then you get to the light half of the album, and that's where he's using basically shrooms and weed to escape from this dark world, to find some kind of purpose, to figure out what he wants to do with himself to get better and to, escape this darkness. And this is also where you get even more of the influences shining through, even more of the like combination of different, Outcast and, like basically each song kind of combines like a classic rap group that he's a fan of, like 3 6 Mafia or something, with a more modern internet sound and create something that's different from both. Something that, you know, is like a SoundCloud rap, but doesn't sound like any generic SoundCloud rap you've heard, you know, like that kind of thing. Just every song is so unique, so different. That's what I love about it. Not every track is ultra memorable. Not every track is the best ever, but like the way that they all transition into each other, the fact that each song has like an intro and outro bit, that's not just like, you know, a straightforward rap song, makes the whole thing feel like a real album experience in a way you rarely get from hip-hop albums that aren't by, say, Kanye West. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan. Would be in my top 10, but like it just doesn't have the track for track power that Taboo does, where Taboo like is less conceptual, but every single fucking song is just super memorable. So, you know, it takes the cake over that. Next up, Jeff Rosenstock's We Cool. This one it's tighter, more succinct, more kept than Worry. And it's got some of my favorite fucking songs on it. I mean, it opens with Get Old Forever is fantastic. You in Weird Cities is probably my favorite punk rock song of all time. You know, the Novelty Sweater is great. Fucking Nausea, super fucking catchy. Beers Again Alone is the ultimate dirge for drinking beers alone. Every track on here is distinctive, memorable, great. The back half of the album doesn't hold up as well as the front half, in my opinion. This is not one that I will always listen to all the way through the way that I might with Worry. Though in part that's because Worry ends with, you know, a 20-minute track essentially broken into parts. That's like mesmerizing. It's hard to turn away from. We Cool comparably starts off stronger and ends kind of on a more emotional, kind of a whimpery note. Not to knock it, I still like the back half of the album plenty. The only track on there I don't really care for that much is probably Hey Allison. But otherwise, really solid fucking album. Just great punk rock music. Great for if you just want a fucking hit of emotional, loud feels. Alright, next up is the Mars Volta, Deloused in the Comatorium. Everything I said about Francis the Mute, repeat here. This was their first album. It's even more varied than Francis the Mute. Francis the Mute kind of locks into one sort of feel and explores it all the way through and has a lot more of these long, weird passages of like birds chirping and shit. Deloused is more of you know, it's I won't say it's more straightforward because it's hard for me to say that anything by the Mars Volta is straightforward, but it's more of like a dreamscape. It's more like you're going through different phases, different micro stories in service of a larger narrative. And you know, there's just a lot of fucking great memorable tracks in there. Again, super weird, super different. And I've listened to it a billion fucking times. So, yeah, I love it. Next up, Death Grips, fucking The Money Store. This one is the heavier, darker, more experimental. Song lengths are cut down a little bit. It's not so much about hip-hop as it is about making just, like, really unique conceptual tracks. The Money Store fucking rips. All of the, like, the songs on here that I love are all some of my favorite songs. Once again, you got tracks like fucking Get Got, The Fever, I've Seen Footage, Hustle Bones, fucking Hacker, all God tier songs. This album, every song on here is great, but this is definitely one where I will find myself getting a little bit more lost in the weeds because the midsection of the album is very dark and very heavy and very chaotic. And I like that, but it's not always something I want to listen to all the way through. Whereas Ex-Military, as dark as it is always fun. Like, it's always something I could just throw on and fucking listen to the whole thing. The Money Store, I had to be in more of a particular mind state to handle some of those other songs. And, like, more likely I'll just take the more fun, you know, high tempo tracks, throw them on an iPod and love them every time they come on. Whereas something like Lost Boys is a little bit more intensive, a little bit more of a sit down experience, if you will. But nonetheless, every track is great. They're all interesting in their own ways and definitely memorable. So, killer ass album. Next up this is new to my list, even though it's an album that I've been into for a long time. Rock Impo Goroshi. This was the album that Maximum the Hormone did before Bui Kikaesu, and I don't know why I didn't have it on my list before. Because when I first got into this band, I was listening to both albums all the time, and I think at some point I just kind of forgot about Rock Impo Goroshi, or I was just listening to the other one more. And, or maybe I just didn't have it on my computer for some reason. Like, maybe I had all the tracks from Bui Kikaesu, but none from this. I think part of it is just because I didn't know the individual tracks as well on this album. But returning to it recently, I threw it on and I was like, this album is so fucking good. It's like it's probably my favorite just like hardcore punk album. My favorite just straight up rip and tear. Each track's like 2 minutes long. The whole album's like maybe 30 minutes, even though it's like 16 tracks. And they're all fucking in and out, make a point. Killer fucking choruses, super memorable. Again, it's got their fusion of like nu metal, punk, and pop, but this one's a little bit less nu metal-y. It's a little bit more punk, a little more straightforward. Not as many of the like. The song structures are not as interesting as Bui Kikaesu, but the just raw songwriting is just as good. Just as much super memorable riffs, super memorable fucking choruses. Tons of tracks that I love. Fucking Rock and Roll Chainsaw or Rolling 1000 Tune or any of these just fucking, again, rip and tear punk tracks that I absolutely love. I just love the vibe of Maximum the Hormone. It's something weirdly wholesome to me. Just the fact that they don't take themselves seriously at all. The fact that even though their lyrics are edgy and ridiculous, they're played for laughs, and that's what makes it a fun time. Meanwhile, another band that I would say probably doesn't take themselves that seriously, even if it's a lot edgier, The Fall of Troy, Doppelganger. Unfortunately, the only good album they have, but this album is just fucking insane guitar work applied to a hardcore album. Like, they have the breakdowns, they have the mixture of high-pitched emo vocals and screaming, the heaviness. It would be just a hardcore album if not for the fact that the fucking guitar playing is just insanely good. Super fucking technical riffs all over the place. Great, interesting song structures. Great songwriting all around. The way that some of these riffs just chain into each other when you get into a fucking whirl of just riff after riff after riff going into each other, super unique every single time. You're like, what the fuck? Like, how did these guys write these songs? Like, it elevates its genre. Like, it's a style of music I would not ordinarily listen to, but this album just does it so fucking well. It's so much more advanced than anything else in the hardcore genre that I find myself returning to it. Not every track on the album is equally amazing, but it's, again, another one that's so unique that I can't really even get the vibe of it from somewhere else, so I will always return to it. But there's songs like Mouths Like Sidewinder Missiles, FCP Remix, Act 1, Scene 1, just lots of, great memorable tracks on there. Wacko Jacko Steals the Elephant Man's Bones. Good fucking album. Alright, one of the newer additions to the list, JPEG Mafia with Veteran. Much like that last one, this is one that not every track on here do I absolutely love or consider to be super memorable, but there is nothing else that sounds like JPEG Mafia. Super fucking unique experimental hip-hop composer who you can tell he puts a lot of fucking work into his songs. They have so much detail, so many unique structures, unique soundscapes. He finds noises that are totally original, sounds that you will not hear in anybody else's music, and he just creates this incredible patchwork of noise that, sometimes is very harsh and abrasive. Sometimes it's difficult to listen to on the first pass. When you listen to this album all the way through the first time, you'll have no idea what the fuck is going on for parts of it. But he manages to make interesting songs, listenable shit, stuff that's hype, stuff that's fun. The opening track is just a smooth fucking bump in the car banger. Then you get into fucking Real Nigga with fucking spelled Nega, if you're wondering why I pronounce it that way. Where it's just him rapping over fucking Dirty Old Bastard going for 2 minutes. It's like, it's obnoxious, but it's so good that you can't help but keep coming back to it, which is how I describe a bunch of this album. Fucking Baby I'm Bleeding is the fucking GOAT. It's the most hype track, probably my favorite song of 2018. I greatly appreciate this album. Couldn't stop listening to it when it was, well, okay, I won't say that because honestly, it's not the easiest thing to listen to, so it's not like I was putting it on fucking constantly, but the more I listened to it, the more I got into it. It's one of those that you really have to spend some time sinking your teeth into it, exploring it, parsing out where each song begins and ends to get a better sense of what each song is. But I just have mad respect for the level of fucking polish that he puts into his music that is so far beyond what any other hip-hop artist is doing at the moment. So yeah, mad respect to JPEG Mafia. Next up, Lamar's Volta with Amputexture. Now this is an album where I'm almost torn on it because I only really love like half the songs. It's only 8 tracks, and a few of them I could take or leave. But Tetragrammaton, the second track, 16 minutes long, possibly my favorite song of all time. Just the most epic, the most swirling, emotional, sounding like a summary of the entire fucking universe, in the way that I would understand it. Like, something that sounds like all of time and space compressed into a 16-minute track with these dizzying whirlwind guitars, these crazy riffs, the insane full band doing all kinds of shit, the amazing, weird, cryptic lyrics, soaring diva vocals from Cedric, a billion layers of sound. It's incredible. You've also got songs like Day of the Baphomets, which has one of the best bass solos of all time in it. You've got songs like fucking Mecha Amputexture, which is also great. Vicarious Atonement, which opens the album in this very mysterious and cool way. All that stuff is great. Not as big a fan of Asilos Magdalena. Viscera Eyes is just okay. Kind of sounds like they made it to be a single, but it's a little overlong. The last track's not the best, and the shorter one in the middle, what is it, Vermicide? That one's okay. It's again just kind of a single track, but it's not as powerful as say The Widow from the previous album, or some of their better tracks. But like nonetheless, the 4 songs that are incredible on this album, especially Tetragrammaton, are enough to put it this high on my list. Tetragrammaton is legendary in my mind, so absolutely one of my favorite albums for those reasons. Next up, Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. I will say, I don't think this album has aged as well as I would have hoped. I think I was listening to this a hell of a lot back when I first started really getting into hip-hop, and I would credit this album with getting me into hip-hop in a much bigger way. Like, I grew up with it here and there. I was never actively listening to hip-hop music until I heard this. So, mad props for that. And, there's a bunch of fucking amazing singles on here. Stuff like Swimming Pools, Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, Money Trees is a great track. There's no songs I dislike on this album. I think Mad City is the best fucking track on there. That song's totally crazy. Amazing beat shift. Different vocal styles from Kendrick that are all great. Incredibly hard-hitting lyrics. And again, all the tracks on here are good. I just don't think that as many of them are like classics as we will get on, say, To Pimp a Butterfly. This album still beats that one out for me because I like it all the way through. To Pimp a Butterfly has a bunch of tracks that I don't really care about even if the ones that are great are amazing. But this album, I can still listen to it all the way through, still have a great time. I'm just basically explaining why it's not in my top 10. I don't know why I'm coming down so hard on an album that's on my favorites list, but like, I still love it. I still fucking Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe. The remix version is my favorite version of the song. I even like the bonus tracks on this album. The Recipe, fucking, what's it called? Now or Never. Great songs. Yeah, it's still a fucking... It feels like an album that came out forever ago, somehow. Like, it feels like it's already a classic album that... I guess because it was dated even for its time. Like, it was deliberately going for kind of an old-school sound. But it feels even older than it is just because some time has passed and I've heard it so many times, But it's still fucking bumps. Clarence Clarity's Know Now, one of the most interesting, unique albums and artists of recent years. He does what I would describe as, like, I guess glitch pop music, but it's so grandiose, so over the top, so glistening. There's so many weird sounds and styles that he incorporates into his sort of pop R&B, I guess, sound that it really doesn't sound like anything else. And some of this album is a ton of tracks. All of them are totally unique. They all have different weird structures. Some songs just sort of dissolve midway through or transform. It kind of sounds like somebody poured a bottle of acid on the album. I did a Vinyl Fridays on this once, so you can go watch that for like a more detailed review. But yeah, it's got some... This is one that doesn't have a ton of classic amazing songs. I particularly love Those Who Can't Cheat, Cancer in the Water. There's a few tracks that are definitely like iPod worthy, and I love the album overall. I just don't think that as many of the songs stand out, but you will not find another album that feels or sounds like this. And it's such a unique experience that I could not stop listening to this one back in like 2015 or whatever when it came out. So yeah, great fucking record. Next up, Aguilach, Ashes Against the Grain. This was my favorite band for a long time. I would describe them as gray metal. They're sort of black metal, like a folksy black metal, but just less intense, less aggressive, more atmospheric, more like post-rock infused. And all their albums are fucking great. Ashes Against the Grain is probably my favorite just because it has a few of what I would consider their best songs on it. Songs like Falling Snow or Not Unlike the Waves, which was, used to be my favorite song. It's still up there. Fucking Our Fortress is Burning Part 2, Limbs, Goddamn, Fire Above, Ice Below. All fantastic songs. I would say the biggest flaw in this album is just that the final track is just like a weird wind noise that's not very good, and there's a few spots where it's not as exciting, but the songwriting is just so fucking tight on this album. It gives you all the post-rock feels while having a heavier, more unique folk metal sound to it that puts it above the way post-rock sounds to me. I'm not as into the glistening like a band like Mono. I appreciate their music, but like that sort of swelling, emotional, kind of almost Hallmarky feeling to me doesn't give me the same energy that something a little bit darker and more more gritty does. But this is the least gritty of Aguilach's albums, but I think it just has the overall best songwriting. Marrow of the Spirit's not far behind, but we're going to get to that in the next section. Next up, Mindless Self-Indulgence, Frankenstein Girls Seem Strangely Sexy. Now, Mindless Self-Indulgence, no one of their albums is like my absolute favorite. I just love tons and tons of their tracks, and this one has the most. It has 30 fucking songs. Most of them are short as hell. Most of them are just weird little ideas that are hilarious. I love the style of MSI, that their songs always change forms multiple times, even in the span of a short track. They're just energetic freakouts with really unique production styles and hilarious fucking vocals. Probably the biggest musical influence on me overall. Like, as much as I love all kinds of stuff on here and everything's influenced me, Mindless Self-Indulgence, just the tone, the way that they present themselves is a huge influence on the way I present myself. This sort of over-the-top character who's very down on himself and, like, but in a funny way, always being kind of outlandish and aggressive. It's, like, probably the most me core music that there is. But and if you fucking were to ride around in my car and listen to my iPod, Mindless Self-Indulgence comes on almost every fucking car ride, because they have so many goddamn songs that I love. But Frankenstein Girls is the best just collection of classic tracks that they have, and it's got so many of them. And then next up, we have The Uncluded with Hokey Fright. This is Aesop Rock and Kimya Dawson, who are respectively a very technical rapper and a folk musician who did the Juno soundtrack together on an album. And it's really unique and quirky and sort of innocent and lovely. You've got these combinations of rapping and folk music that every song is very different on this album. It's sort of experimental, even if the tracks are kind of straightforward, but they don't really sound like anything else. And I just love the vibe that they bring on this album. It's very sincere and honest and feelsy, and a lot of the songs are about really unique things. I've made a video before about why I love the song TV on 10 as one of my favorite rap verses of all time. Zombie Cafe, which is a song about using candy to cheer yourself up after minor injuries and stuff like that. I just think that their playfulness works together really well, where you've got Kimya Dawson, who's more straightforward, emotional, heartfelt, and then Aesop Rock, who is comparably very guarded with himself, but, you know, in his sort of cheeky way, trying to embrace a more emotional side, you know, through this collaboration, sort of. It's great. I love the combination of the two. I wish they had made more music, but, you know, this album is lengthy and it covers a lot of ground, so I'm still pretty satisfied with what we have there. God damn. Sorry about all the sniffliness. All right, we're getting into the third tier. This is still all albums I really love. Like, I mean, everything in my top 100 is obviously something I adore, but, you know, these first three tiers are all phenomenal albums. The Ocean and the Sun by The Sound of Animals Fighting. This is probably my favorite, just like psychedelic, dreamy experience of a rock album. Like, if there's a reason that like Dark Side of the Moon or any like Pink Floyd albums don't make it on my list or anything of that in that vein, it's because this is what I would go to. This is my go-to art rock, experimental, you know, sort of proggy experience. And it's very unique because they are a super group of sort of hardcore and mathy, emo, screamo bands, that came together to make their first album, Tiger and the Duke, is more of a straightforward, like, post-hardcore album. Then their second one was just a pure experimentation. This one kind of combines the two vibes. So you've got tracks that are more low tempo, sort of watery, almost milky sounding, dreamy tracks where the vocals are never quite at the forefront. There's a lot of different kind of singers going on, a lot of different sounds. It's hard to like just pin it down or grasp any one thing about it. Until you get to the midsection, you start getting the heavy and crazy guitars and all the really technical playing, the really insane shredding riffs. It's an album with lots of peaks and valleys emotionally. You start off in more of a chilled out, vibey space. You eventually get into more of an aggressive, but fun kind of place. Then things get really weird with tracks like Uzbekistan going off the rails, and then finally ending on a sort of spiritual note with the final tracks. Every song on this is really unique and good. No other album sounds like this at all. So, yeah, I return to it a lot. I would say that No one track on here is like one of my favorite songs of all time, which is why it's not quite in the next tier, but still very returnable. Similarly, how I feel about Psy's Imaginary Sonicscape. This is the weirdest metal album. Psy is the weirdest metal band. They come from Japan. They have their roots in black metal. And there's a lot of black metal influence on this. But what they've done with it is basically their style is to make sort of chipper, almost funny and goofy, like sunny sounding music that is also just has tortured screamed vocals, dark riffs, dark themes. It's like basically their music is meant to sound like if you've completely lost your mind to the point that you're enjoying it. You know, it's the music of being a violent psychopath living inside of his own head, but in there it's all sunshine and rainbows, you know? But they do this without really coming off as like edgy or try hard because the music just doesn't sound like anything else. It's just so fucking strange. And this is my favorite of their albums. I mean, we're going to get to at least one more in here, and each one has kind of a different feel to it, a different take on that same feelings, but this is probably their most upbeat, their most like fun album, the one with the most sunny tracks, and just lots of cool, memorable riffs. It's really fun and heavy and fast-paced and straightforward. I like the expanded version that also comes with the 2 extra bonus tracks that are a little bit slowed down, but also just weird and distinctive. This is a band that will, you know, be playing a metal song and then suddenly it'll have like a classical bit in there or some kind of strange string arrangement, or there'll be a saxophone over the mix. You never know what you're going to get. And this is my favorite like thing to listen to when I'm creating art. If I'm especially drawing, I love to listen to this. It's very inspiring. Puts me in that kind of headspace. Next up, The Deer Hunter, Act 2. I don't listen to The Deer Hunter as much as I used to because I do think that a lot of their songs are a little bit cringy. But that's okay because I love them. The Deer Hunter, sort of a neo-prog, indie prog band who, they're, in my opinion, like their early music in particular is known for its interesting song structures. Once again, they're sort of similar to Coheed and Cambria in that each track feels like it's telling a story. It feels like a complete piece that's exploring an emotional idea as part of a narrative. They have, much like Coheed, a concept that goes across all their albums. And Act 2, I think, has the most distinctive vibe, the most distinctive sort of story being told in it, where the first half of the album is really about the setup of this narrative of, this character moving through his life through these different phases. And you've got phenomenal songs like The Church and the Dime, which is just this explosive, very distinct, I want to call it a rock song, but I don't even know what to compare it to. It's a kind of sound that only really existed in the mid to late 2000s, I guess. But even then, it's pretty different. They always have this kind of vaudeville air to their songs. Like, you get the sense the story takes place in like the early 1900s, and the music kind of conveys that in some strange way. And there's like almost a musical theater element to it. But the most memorable part is just I think that Casey Crescenzo writes great vocal melodies, and I don't think he's necessarily the best singer, but he puts so much fucking heart and emotion into his singing, and it's so fun to sing along to. Like, my favorite thing about The Deer Hunter is just singing along to all the tracks, and helps that I'm kind of in the vocal range of it, but they're just the most fun songs to fucking sing for me. I think a lot of people who like to sing, y'all have that band that you listen to because you like to sing it, and The Deer Hunter is that for me. Particularly this album. Songs like Red Hands is the most singable track of all time, and I love that it's just this edgy, dramatic track about infidelity. Not every song on there is my favorite. There's a few skippable ones in the back half of the album. And again, I haven't been listening to it as much lately because, I don't know, haven't been in as much of a singing mood, I guess. But it's still an album I'll return to when I want to bust out some vocals. So next up, we have Circle Takes the Square with As the Roots Undo, my favorite Screamo album. They're a Screamo band that also has elements of like post-rock and like a little bit of like ISIS influence over top of very technical, sort of mathy Screamo, very complex, dense, and chaotic sounding music. Like, a lot of their songs, when you hear it for the first time, you're just like, what in the fuck is going on? There's a lot of shit happening, you know, a lot of sort of atonal melodies, like stuff that doesn't seem like there's any structure to it until you really peel it back and recognize it. And the fact that it can sound so messy yet so tight, where the vocals are going all over the place. There's two vocalists. They're often singing over each other. The lyrics are super interesting. I love the poeticism of them. Songs like Non-Objective Portrait of Karma, some of my favorite lyrics of all time. Really interesting vocal takes, a really interesting sound palette. The way their guitars sound and everything is cool. The song structures are extremely unique. Yeah, I don't listen to it as much as maybe I used to, but I still consider it a really great album. Loud City Song by Julia Holter. This is a great, spacious, sort of chamber pop, bedroom pop like kind of music. It's very sweet, somber, again spacious. It's the first track has lots of silence in it, and it's a very like atmospheric, vibey kind of singer-songwriter album that goes through some very unique passages, some very different kinds of sounds. It's good mellow music. I don't listen to a lot of mellow music. This is probably the mellowest album that I love. Because again, it's very distinctive. Once more, very unique song structures. You will not find any like verse, chorus, verse songs on this album. I love how distant a lot of the sounds are. Like, the vocals are always like right up to your ear, but the instrumentals are kind of, you know, swirling in this background space, and it paints a very vivid picture of this nighttime city, low-key kind of interpersonal melodrama vibe, but not even melodrama. It's so relaxed. Yeah, it's a fascinating album. It really doesn't sound like anything else I've ever heard before. Next up, Boris Is Flood. This is the ultimate fucking zone out. It's not ambient drone, but it is the closest to that is something I would consider like memorable. You know, like, I like ambient drone, but this has melody. It has some structure to it, but it's very much like playing a slight variation on a riff for 15 minutes as you slowly get into it. And the album has this overall flow where it starts with this really weird passage that sort of seems like it's meant to hypnotize you, where it is literally the same riff being played for a long time, but like each note is slightly in a different place as it goes on until it becomes a different riff. And once you've been lulled in by that, then it starts playing this slow, melodic track that's just kind of I guess I would call it like a slowcore song that builds on itself until it finally explodes into this epic post-metal track that goes on for a while, hits you with super fucking big feels, and then fades out for like 20 straight minutes. This was my bedtime album for a long time. Almost every night I'd go to bed and listen to Flood or Death Consciousness, which I don't remember if I put that on the list, but so I don't listen to it as much anymore because I don't really listen to music when I go to bed anymore because I share a bed now. But yeah, Flood, it's just such a unique vibe. Seeing it in concert was the best live show I've ever been to, so that also adds some points. But it's probably my favorite Boris album, just for being such a fucking unique piece. Oh boy, this is taking so fucking long. Let me make sure I'm still recording here. Also close this window. Okay, Death Grips, The Powers That Be! So, I actually like the first half the most. Niggas on the Moon is 30 minutes of weird fucking shit. It's built largely out of Bjork samples. I think that basically what this album is that fucking, what's his goddamn name? Zach Hill has his E-kit that he uses to perform the Death Grips beats. And there's a bunch of Bjork samples that have been plugged into each drum on his E-kit, and he's just going apeshit. He's just going completely fucking insane on his drum kit, playing Bjork samples as opposed to drum noises, and MC Ride finds a way to rap over that. And his vocal stylings are so unique on this album. The lyrics are insane. It's a tightly crafted 30 minutes of raw experimental insanity. And particularly like the back half of it is super fun fuck music. I love it. Then you got the second half, Jenny Death. And Jenny Death is a little bit more hit or miss for me, but it does have some of the best songs ever. I mean, fucking Inanimate Sensation is one of my, top 5 Death Grip songs for sure. One of my favorite songs of all time. You got stuff like the more emotional On GP, the more like rock-centric songs, the weird fucking cyberpunk experimental shit, like Why a Bitch Gotta Lie. Fucking, it's an all over the place album. There's a bunch of interesting tracks on it. A lot of stuff that I do really like, but there's some songs that I'm just I don't feel as strongly about. So like, it's kind of like the first half is great as one consistent piece. It's not something I can listen to all the time. I have to be in a really particular headspace, but I will listen to it all the way through every time. Whereas Jenny Death is more like, there's a few songs that I absolutely love. The rest of it I could take or leave. So that's why it's down this far, but nonetheless, still a great fucking double album. Next up, Marrow of the Spirit by Aguilach. Basically everything I said about Ashes Against the Grain also applies here, but this one is a little bit darker, more dismal, more grainy and gritty. Basically, Aguilach said that they felt that Ashes Against the Grain was too clean. It was, got away from their roots as like a more folksy black metal, lo-fi sound. And so they wanted to get back to that, and they did it tremendously. The songwriting's incredible on this album. There's some really distinctive passages, some stuff that's, different from anything they'd done before. I absolutely adore the opening track, which is just a violin playing in the forest, and it's just such a unique, sad fucking melody, and it leads perfectly into the insane blast beat that kicks off track 2. Overall, I don't think as many of the songs on this album are memorable as the ones on Ashes Against the Grain. There's not any song on here that I think stands out in my mind as much as not unlike The Waves or Falling Snow does, but it's still, track for track, incredible songs. There's only like 6 on the album, so they're all long, interesting, multiphasic pieces. Next up, Pom Pom by Ariel Pink. This is a wacky fucking album. Half of it is Ariel Pink songs, who does a sort of psychedelic pop that is very lo-fi, but very well produced. Like, in spite of the fact that it sounds old and it's deliberately low fidelity, the detail in the production, the amount of weird sounds and voices and just variance that goes on in these tracks is what makes them so great as bubblegum pop music. Some of them have weird time signatures and stuff like that. It's just really interesting pop songs. And then the other half of the tracks mixed in with them were written by this other dude. I can't remember his name. It was a guy who had a long history of making like goofy sort of comedy kitsch music, who on his deathbed passed on a lot of his songs that he had written to Ariel Pink and some other artists, and they're all fucking hilarious. Ariel Pink brings them to life beautifully. Just funny, goofy, weird, outlandish songs that make this album even kookier and crazier than it would have otherwise been. I'm a big fan. I think it's another one that, again, doesn't necessarily have any of my favorite songs of all time, but every song is pretty good, very unique. It's fucking good shufflecore music. Next up, Simple Math by Manchester Orchestra. What I love about this album as compared to Mean Everything to Nothing is whereas that one is very much locked into one vibe, this one is every track has a different emotion to it. It's a different sort of color. You start off with the very somber and mellow Deer, which I love. Goes into Mighty, which is like a heavier kind of barn burner of a track. Then you got Pensacola, which is more of like an indie pop, like fucking Death Cab for Cutie type of song, but really fun. Then you've got like Virgin, which is dark and fucking heavy, dismal, dramatic. You get to the back half of the album, you got songs like Leaky Breaks, which I really love. It's this like sort of 7-minute like plotting mellow story song. It's like a bit of a I don't even know what to compare it to really. But I love it. I love the sleepy vibe of it. I love that it goes along for song. The only song I can think of that's similar is All the Go-In-Betweens by Silversun Pickups from their first EP, which is a similarly 7-minute kind of weird mid-tempo song that has a dreamy vibe. Simple Math is lower on my list because I don't love every track. I think the title track, while good, is really corny. Pale Black Eye is pretty good. Not my favorite. Apprehension, I'm not that big a fan of, or the one that comes right either before or after it. But, otherwise, a lot of great songs on there. I just love that it changes vibes so much. I love that it goes through so many different phases. So next up, At the Drive-In, Relationship of Command. The most fucking aggressive, crazy fucking experimental post-hardcore album. It was the last At the Drive-In album before they dissolved and Omar and Cedric became the Mars Volta. You will find shades of where the Mars Volta comes from here, but for the most part, this is just a mega fucking aggressive post-hardcore album. But, like, the songs get so weird and so experimental and so different that you can't really even compare it to anything else in the genre. Cedric's just insane screams all across this thing make it heavy and angry. It's one of my favorite, just like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's go apeshit kind of albums. But also has my favorite track on there, and one of my favorite songs of all time is the calmer track, fucking, oh my god, what is it called? This is so difficult to remember the name of every song of every fucking album that I talk about, but the one that's like, calloused heels, marked in travel, endless marks made by the scalpels. Damn it. Oh, Invalid Litter Department. Thank God. I did a fucking cover of the song. How could I not remember it? Yeah, it's one of the most emotional, grandiose, big feeling, almost like an emo song, but just fucking crushingly dramatic and really sort of depressing. Good fucking song. Love it. Love the album. I would say this is another one where that might be one of my favorite songs, and One Arm Scissor is also great. Otherwise, the album, no particular track is like one of my all-time favorite songs. It's more of a fun, casual album, and it does kind of go on a little long. Like the later tracks, some of the songs are a little bit longer and more experimental, and they're hit or miss for me. It doesn't have the get in and get out nature of like the Maximum the Hormone songs that I ended up putting higher above it, which is why I won't return to it as much as those albums. But nonetheless, it is great. Next up, this is Clipping's second album. I guess it's a self-titled, except there's no I's in it. So, this is experimental hip-hop, super fucking unique and detailed production. They're a band who they come up with sounds that they make up all their own sounds. Let's put it that way. They make super unique noise hip-hop music. Their first album was more about harsh noise, more about like the Merzbow meets hip hop kind of vibe. This one is more about like just making interesting experiments where they take like traditionally structured songs, like pop rap songs, and then just make them out of the weirdest instrumentals possible. Make them sound as different as possible. You've got Daveed Diggs, who is an incredibly technically proficient storyteller, rapper. He's, a Tony Award winner because he played fucking Thomas Jefferson, I think, in goddamn Hamilton. But here he's in a fucking harsh-ass experimental noise album. The thing about this one is this is another one that is half songs that I think are some of the greatest songs of all time. Body and Blood, Work Work, fucking I like Inside Out a lot, and Summertime. Fucking those are all songs that are like god tier. Other stuff on here is more interesting. Oh, Story 2 also fucking god tier. Some songs are just interesting and unique, like Get Up, where he's rapping over a fucking alarm clock noise. I love it. But do I listen to it all the time? Not so much. There's a few tracks in the back part of the album that I don't really return to. Overall, I appreciate this album more so than purely enjoy it on, like, when it comes to all the tracks, but the ones that I love are absolute favorites, so, you know, it's still a fucking classic album. Next up, Shibu T the Penelope EP. This is only 5 songs, maybe 6, actually. 6 tracks. They're all fucking great. Shibu T was Coheed and Cambria before they were Coheed and Cambria. I think that I like them even more. It's just unfortunate that they only ever had, like, they technically had several EPs. This was the best one. The Delirium Trigger EP that came after this is mostly songs that would later be on the Second Stage Turbine Blade. But this one is dark, grungy, fucked up. The subject matter is, like, very edgy but tongue-in-cheek. Songs about just like pedophilia, I guess. It's a fucking weird ass album, and it's really just gritty, and it's like if you took a band who was influenced by bands like At the Drive-In, but also bands like Jane's Addiction, and also bands like Iron Maiden, and like found this weird grungy middle ground between all that. It's got these pummeling heavy bass lines. The production is really ass, but I like the way it sounds. It's like, it's muddy and gross, and that fits the tone of the music. It's a lot heavier than anything Coheed and Cambria ever did. A lot more dark and gritty. And I just think all the songs are incredibly well constructed and fun. I wish that I wish there was more. Like, I wish Shibu T was a band that had more music, because I love that particular sound. And, like, sure, Coheed and Cambria exists, but it doesn't sound like this. So I feel like I'll never get it again, you know? Great fucking EP. Next up, Proto Men, Act 2, The Father of Death. Proto Men, they are an operatic rock outfit that makes songs telling the story of Mega Man from their own unique perspective. Their first album is fun and cool and tells a tight little story, and each track is very different. I don't think it holds up as well as this one does, where the production's way better, the songwriting's way better, it's more unique, it goes through all these different chapters and phases, it tells a very complete cinematic story with just some fucking killer songs on it. Songs like The Hounds, or Keep Quiet, or Breaking Out, Father of Death. These are all phenomenal songs that I would definitely put in my favorites list. It's not totally consistent. I think the 2 slower songs on this album are a lot worse than the others. The female vocals are unfortunately terrible. And it's, you know, it's goofy and cheesy in places. Some of the instrumental stuff is more interesting as part of the story than it is as, like, you know, this is an album to be... there's certain tracks you can take out of it and listen to them on their own, but most of the songs really just work as part of the album experience, which is fine, but, you know, it's fucking great. Mastodon, Blood Mountain. Mastodon is one of the most blisteringly fast-paced, technical, just like thrash metal. I don't know what I would call them, really. I mean, they've got elements of sludge and thrash and, even just like a poppier metal sound that starts to pop up on this album, you know, as they went in a more straightforward direction. But their songwriting is just really unique. They basically just string together a bunch of really fucking badass riffs. They have, you know, a lot of different sort of slight variants on their sound palette going throughout this album. It's another one where it's a concept album where each song feels like its own chapter in a story that tells of its own unique creature or monster that the characters are sort of fighting against. This weird psychedelic mystical journey up Blood Mountain with all these just fucking insanely badass riffs. I love that they have multiple vocal styles that pop up on their albums. Just all around, it's a fun fucking time. I think I got a couple more of theirs coming. But Blood Mountain has the most consistent track list, in my opinion. There's only a couple songs I don't like as much. None of them I would say is like my favorite song of all time, but there are some tracks that like Crystal Skull, Circle of the Sasquatch, The Wolf is Loose, all really classic. Next up, Black Black. Black Black was a band that only ever made 2 EPs. Really lo-fi, low performance grade. I will say the musicians in this band are not necessarily the best at playing, but the sound that they create is so distinctive. It's this, oh god, I don't even know how to describe it. It's sort of like a dark yet twinkling, sarcastic but moody. It really doesn't sound like anything else, and that's a big part of what I love about it. It's got these drab vocals that sound like imagine if the one, god damn it, I can't remember her fucking name, Aubrey Plaza was like a vocalist or something. You would get something like this, but the songs are very imaginative. They're all about like just sort of zoning out and going to dreamlands and thinking about weird monsters and cool shit. And there's also songs like the energy songs about being depressed, about your lack of energy. It's kitschy, it's sort of hipstery, but again, the sound is just so distinct that it doesn't come off as like lame hipster shit to me. It comes off as a really unique and kind of heartfelt experience. You got songs like Algorithmics and Gurren Tax Tax, which I think is legitimately an epic little story. You've got, there's cover of Skulls by Misfits, which is phenomenal. I love these guys. They only ever made, again, 2 EPs that were collected into one album, I guess, but it's unfortunate they didn't do more. Next up, Jane's Addiction, Nothing's Shocking. This is like my mom's favorite album, so I kind of grew up with it, but I love the bigness of the sound of Jane's Addiction. They were doing sort of like funk, rock, artsy kind of sound, something a little bit psychedelic, a little bit a little bit hard nosed, where they've got the insane guitar playing of Dave Navarro, who basically I think just improvs crazy solos in every track. I don't think he's ever played the same solo twice. I think he just is really good at improving cool sounding guitar solos. But this album has such a great sound. I fucking love the way the drums sound. They're enormous, super spacey. Everything is really like reverb soaked and grandiose on this thing. I love the weird vocal effect that Perry Farrell uses on all of his stuff. They just create really big sounding, fun rock music that has, again, distinctive song structures. Each track's a little bit different. There's kind of consistent things in a lot of my favorite albums, if you can't tell. I love that it goes into like the psychedelic passages for a little bit, but never kind of steers too far off into the weeds, which I think that maybe happens a little more on their next album. But yeah, there's a lot of memorable fucking tracks on here. A lot of good shit. Next up, Delgado's Hate. This album I discovered because the opening track is the OP to fucking Gunslinger Girl. They make basically symphonic pop music, I guess. Pop music with symphonic elements, we'll say. But it's all very depressing. It's all like sarcastically dark pop songs that are emotional and they all have a really big sound. Again, each track is kind of unique and has its own feel to it. There's some more somber tracks, some more funny, kind of again sarcastic, but with a different tone from what I've heard from really anything else. It's been a big one for me for a long time. I'm getting really I'm gonna just like plow through the last stretch of this just so you guys know, because I can't fucking do this all day. Flogging Molly, Drunken Lullabies, fucking amazing folk punk Irish music. They combine the stylings of classic Irish folk tracks with just fun, well structured, well written pop punk bangers. The song is just a bunch of fucking fun tracks. Flogging Molly has always had great singles on like all their albums, but this one is the only like consistently great album. Every song could have been a single. I'm saying the same thing over and over again. We were promised jetpacks with These Four Walls. This is like an indie post-rock band that instead of going for the instead of going for like the more shimmery emotional sound, just basically uses the post-rock kind of playing to just make straightforward rock songs that get really fucking big and heavy sounding. Quiet Little Voices is one of the greatest songs of all time. It's thunder and it's lightning. I love every track on this album. Well, that's not true. There's a few that are more skippable, which is why this falls further down on the list. And it's another one with a very unique tone. I won't say that each song sounds different on this one. They all sound kind of the same, but they're distinctly written enough to be interesting. This is another band that only ever had one good album, and it's this one. But some of the tracks are just super fucking memorable, and I love listening to it. The Deer Hunter, Act 3. Similar to Act 2, I love it for the singing. I don't think it's as consistent. The back half of the album has a lot of slower tracks that I just don't really care for, but the front half has more experimentation, more grandiose songwriting. It's a little bit more of a war drama epic, whereas the last one was more of a personal melodrama kind of album. I think that they do a lot of unique and interesting things on this album. Not every experiment necessarily pays off, but the tracks that are great are great. Portugal the Man, In the Mountain, in the Cloud. This is just like Beatles-inspired folk rock pop music that is very good. Particularly the front half, I would say songs like We Got It All, This Can't Be Living Now. It's one of my favorite, just like straightforward 4-chord song rock tracks. Mostly because, again, of the very swelling instrumentation that they've got over top of this. It's got a certain bigness to it that they have not duplicated on their later albums. The production does kind of suck on this album, but I like it for some reason. You got tracks like So American, fun pop song, Floating, This Can't Be Living Now. Yeah, there's a bunch of good shit on here. It's not their... Well... It's probably it's my favorite Portugal the Man album, more for the unique sound. Not all of the tracks in the later half are super memorable, but it's all good. It's listenable all the way through. I don't know if it's as consistent as the Satanic Satanist, which will come up in a little bit, but it's got my favorite overall sound. Hop Along, Painted Shut, super unique indie rock band. The female vocalist is very different. You will not hear another vocalist who sounds like her. She's got this gruff, husky voice that goes between sort of emotional singing and aggressive, and their music is, I guess I would mostly compare it to Manchester Orchestra, being like a kind of a muscular version of indie rock. It's heavier, more hard-nosed, more aggressive than most of that stuff, while still having like a very emotional edge to it. The last track, Sister Cities, is god tier. Lil Ugly Mane, Mr. Thug Isolation. Lil Ugly Mane, one of my favorite hip-hop producers and rappers. He's super interesting. This album is mostly indebted to classic 3-6 Mafia, back when they, like the early unreleased tapes that have been hugely influential to the modern wave of like SoundCloud rap and hip hop. Lil Ugly Mane is kind of, I think, one of the forefront producers in that genre, and somebody who was able to find very unique ways to make this old school style of rap. I think he is simultaneously the closest to just capturing what it sounded like while also making it new. His lyrics are goofy and fun. He's a somewhat older rapper who I think approaches things from more of a technical lens on this album. After this, he became way more experimental, and I think we'll talk about some of that a little bit later. Although I don't think I did put one of his other ones on here. Okay, yeah, Mr. Thug Isolation, just great, solid, fun time music. One of my favorite, just like goofy, bombastic hip hop albums to throw on. Though some of the songs do get a little too repetitive for my liking, so that's why it's not higher up. Coheed and Cambria's No World for Tomorrow. Every song on here is like as epic as it possibly could be. This is the big finale to the whole storyline. So every single track sounds like climactic. I love how dense it is, how fucking over the top it is. The production is unfortunately garbage, so you can never feel like you're listening to it loud enough. No matter, even if your ears are fucking bleeding, because everything's kind of mixed into the same range. But nonetheless, it's just got so many songs that are like hell yeah tracks. Gravemakers and Gunslingers being the captain of all the hell yeah tracks, if not the title track No World for Tomorrow. You've got the epic 5-part closing series of songs that brings a huge closure to this epic arc that the whole albums have been on. I mean, yeah, it's a climax album, basically. There's a couple songs that aren't as good, but overall, it's fucking lit. Galnerius Resurrection is my favorite power metal album. Galnerius is the most just... It's like Dragon Force, but good. It's like if Dragon Force did know how to write more than one song with unique structures and were even better at their instruments. And, it's fast, it's heavy, it's over the top, fucking crazy riffs, crazy solos, soaring vocals. It's power metal, but at its most technically proficient and tightest songwriting, in my opinion. Love the album. Tool's Lateralis. Tool, big part of my musical upbringing. Sort of proggy, unique sounding. I guess they kind of take like prog metal and combine it with like grunge, especially in their earlier music. This is probably their most like psychedelic and spacious album. Got the most epic tracks, like the title track Lateralis, which is a classic. Parabola. I love the very contemplative, sort of meditative feel of this album. It's something to listen to when you want to be like a little bit more serious and go into your feelings, if you will. Aja by Steely Dan. Got into this band because of my buddy Ghost Lightning. Aja is smooth, jazzy rock, is yacht rock, but with dark, sarcastic lyrics, if you will. They have just a lot of fucking fun tracks on this album. Deacon Blues, the most like pathetic song ever that's so delightful to indulge in the pain of. Peg, it's a fun poppy track. Aja, which is like this sort of lightly proggy, laid back song about being in a peaceful sort of state of mind. Black Cow, a great bar song, like a jazzy bar song. The back half of the album I don't like as much as the front half, but it's still my favorite Steely Dan record. Imperial by Denzel Curry. We're finally back to more fucking Denzel. Imperial is basically just banger after banger. This was the album that I think Denzel basically made out of his frustration with the fact that he wasn't really getting recognized for his music. Like even though he had a few big hits, people were not really talking about him as like this amazing rapper or like really fixating on the concepts of his albums. I think he basically realized he was going over everyone's heads and that people weren't getting what he was trying to do. So he just decided to make a fucking really straightforward album full of hard, aggressive tracks, because that's kind of what he was best known for, And, but he managed to do that while bringing such a unique personality to it and while being in a sort of better part of his life, because he had been in a really darker place before, and I think that some of the immaturity that he was knowingly letting onto the albums, he kind of stripped away here and had delivered a more straightforward message of like self-betterment and being trying to be true to himself while also being like a hard motherfucker. ULT, Gook, fucking Naughty Head, fucking Sick and Tired, Zenith, and of course my personal favorite, This Life. All phenomenal songs. This album, there's a few tracks I'm not as amazed by. Story with No Title, Pure Enough. They're good songs. Not my favorites. The final track, it's okay. And also just the fact that the album is so sort of uniform in tone, which is also true of his new album Zoo, which I haven't heard enough times to even qualify it, but like they're albums that are very much like stopgap. Like Denzel realizes he's not releasing music fast enough and needs to just get projects out there so that his name stays in people's mouths, and so he just releases a bunch of hard shit. And like Imperial's a great album of that. I need to spend more time with Zoo before I can really determine anything about it. Next up, Melt Banana Fetch. This is this searing acid punk nightmare scape of high-pitched, crazy, noisy sounds of a Japanese woman with a squeaky voice screaming crazy stuff over intense drum and guitar patterns. It's awesome. It's fast, it's blistering, it's a great just in and out, short tracks, thunderous, noisy punk sound. It's not quite like anything else out there, and I enjoy it a lot. All right, we're going to go through this last row. I'm going to try to do each one in one sentence. Pearls and Brass, The Indian Tower. Riffs, and more riffs. Super underrated album by a band who basically disappeared after this one didn't get any attention. If you like stoner rock, if you like badass guitar riffs, this album is just riffs leading into each other, like melodic riffs that will get stuck in your head. Tight by Mindless Self-Indulgence, their first album. Everything I said about Frankenstein Girls applies here. Quirky, fun, interesting song structures. I love it. Minna Shine by Shinsei Kamate-chan is the heavier, more aggressive, more pained side of Sumadne. Not as consistent track for track, but still fucking great. Ultimate Razor is the best fucking punk song ever. Dialect with Abandoned Language. They were one of the forefathers of industrial experimental hip-hop, noise hop. They've got this dark, dismal sound, very dreamy, but also dark. Love the rapping, love everything about it. It's one of the first hip-hop albums I ever really loved. Before I even got into hip-hop, I was into this one, so yeah. Slint's Spiderland. Very famous and influential, dark as fuck, sort of, what would I call it? It's like a horror album almost. Like, it's like a grungy post-rock album that has spoken word lyrics just telling these weird little creepy stories. It's very lo-fi, sort of technical riffage going through it. I loved listening to it while reading House of Leaves. Mindless Self-Indulgence, You'll Rebel to Anything. This is probably their first album where the songs have a little bit more structure, or more like fully fledged tracks, without getting quite as poppy as they would on the next album, If, which I'm more torn on. That one has some tracks I really love. A lot of it I could take or leave. You'll Rebel to Anything is tighter. Love the lyrical content, love the theme of the album. And just a bunch of fucking good songs. Foxy Shazam with Introducing. Foxy Shazam, I call them Elvis core. They basically combine elements of like every era of pop and rock music and hardcore into something that really sounds like nothing else. It's heavy and aggressive, but fun and weird and quirky and cool. A bunch of every song on it's really good. It's just like their sound. It appealed to me more 10 years ago than it does now, so I don't listen to it as much as I used to, but I still think it's a bunch of just fucking really solidly constructed tracks that don't sound like anything else ever made. Mastodon with Crack the Sky. As usual, all the great properties of Mastodon, but this is their most like proggy, lengthier tracks, more atmospheric, airy, less concerned with just being like pummeling and fast, and more with being like unique and it's got some really fucking epic tracks on it. Lil Ugly Mane's Third Side of Tape. This is just like a weird. Lil Ugly Mane created just like, I guess, every different genre of music in his career, and eventually just took all these random snippets of songs that he had and put them into these 3 20-minute tracks on this album. He had done a few of these before, but this is the best of the bunch. And it's just an hour of going through all these different sonic styles and feels, and the way it's constructed, it's unpredictable. There's lots of interesting bits in there. Sometimes you're listening to hip hop. Sometimes it's just like experimental noise. Sometimes you're suddenly in a black metal song with ass production, and just that feeling of experimentation, of being lost in this world of a guy's work is really interesting. To Pimp a Butterfly, I basically love half of this album, and the other half I can take or leave. But tracks like fucking For Free, King Kunta, You, All Right, all masterpieces. Also my favorite songs. The Blacker the Berry, also fucking phenomenal. All the other tracks I could really take or leave, honestly. I still think it's a great album. I would listen to it all the way through, but I really feel strongly about those songs and not as much about the others. Aguila the Mantle. This is their most mellow, most folkish album. It's definitely the one that has the most like variance between different songs, where you really get just some straight up folk songs, some that are just atmospheric instrumentals, some that are more like folk ballads and stuff like that in between the harsher, aggressive songs. In the future, they kind of distilled these sounds into different releases, where you might get like the white EP that's just folk, and then something else that's just atmospheric. But this one, combines it all well. It's kind of like a best of Aguilach's sound. And it's got some really great fucking tracks on it. Gorillaz Demon Days, an album that I've listened to so many times it sounds almost like nothing to me, but interesting experimental pop music with a bunch of really fucking great memorable tracks on it. Coheed and Cambria, In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3, the one that got me into the band. I would say it's not as consistent as, say, their first album, and the production hampers it a lot, because like a lot of these songs are trying to sound really epic, and I just think that they are a little too thin to quite accomplish what they're going for. But nonetheless, the title track is still a fucking epic song. It still sounds extremely massive for as thin as it is, and that's kind of impressive in its own right. A bunch of super memorable tracks: Three Evils Embodied in Leveled Shadow, Cuts Marked in the March of Men, fucking A Favorite House Atlantic, Blood Red Summer, the two biggest singles, the two best singles that the band had. Fucking there's all kinds of shit. There's some songs on here that are corny as fuck, but I still love them. The Light in the Glass is ridiculous, but I can't help but enjoy it. Al the Killer is cheesy and fun. The only song I don't like at all is Back End of Forever. I think that's like one of the worst Coheed and Cambria songs, but overall, The Crowing is great too. It's a fucking solid album. The Satanic Satanist by Portugal the Man. This was when they first started going down the road of writing like folksy rock jams. It's their most unique of those, where there's a lot more variance in the tracks. It's not quite so just 4-chord songs. Some of the songs are a little bit weirder. The lyrical content is great. I don't think it's super consistent, and I don't like the sound as much as In the Mountain and the Cloud, but songs like Everyone is Golden and Do You and People Say are all classic Portugal the Man songs. Don't listen to anything, newer from this band. If you only know them from, Ooh, I'm a Rebel Just for Kicks, I promise it doesn't sound like that at all. Misfits Famous Monsters. So this is probably one of the least known Misfits album. They're mostly known for their first few with Danzig as the lead vocalist, but Famous Monsters, I just think track for track has just a bunch of fucking great punk pop songs that are all about like classic movie monsters and stuff like that. They're all like kind of cheesy, edgy lyrics written by the singer when he was a teenager. The singer himself was like much younger than the rest of the band on this album, and I think he brings a unique energy to it that I really appreciate. I love singing along to these tracks, which helps. There's definitely a few songs on this album I outright hate that I just straight up removed from the album because I think they suck. But once you've made those adjustments, the rest of it is straightforward fun, and there's a ton of tracks, so it's not like it's a huge ask to cut some of them. Songs like Saturday Night is a hilarious crooning ballad song that I think is just a ton of fun. A lot of the early tracks are great. Just a fucking fun-ass album. Steely Dan's Can't Buy a Thrill, their first album. Tons of great tracks. Do It Again, Dirty Work. Those are like the bigger singles. Brooklyn Owes the Charmer Under Me, I think, is on this one. Midnight Cruiser. Only a Fool Would Say That, I think, might be on there. And Reelin' in the Years. Yeah, there's like a lot of great Steely Dan songs around here. It's dad rock. I'll admit that, but I dig it. Opeth Watershed. My favorite Opeth album. Prog metal extraordinaires. Their songs are long as shit. They're driven by basically playing a riff hypnotically until it's drilled into your skull, switching between heavier and lighter sounds. This is, I think, their most unique album, the one that has the most... like, their song structures are always kind of the same on their albums, and, like, Blackwater Park is often the favorite because it's more of, like, a straightly, like, just heavy, dark album that is consistent from start to finish. Ghost Reveries, that's coming up, but that one's also pretty unique. It has a lot of variants, but it has a few songs that I think are just not as good, like Grand Conjuration sucks. And Damnation would almost make this list. That one's their more straight up prog album. I did a whole Opeth worst to best video once, but Watershed just has so many great, unique tracks that, you know, even for Opeth, break the mold and do something a little bit different. The Lotus Eater or Porcelain Heart are some of my favorite tracks they've ever done. So yeah, Burden, fucking yeah, that's an epic one. I love it. Mastodons Leviathan. This one is before they were quite as much of a... Like, they were a little bit sludgier on this, and the tone of the water theme comes through a lot. The way that they sort of tune their guitars and everything has a very distinctive feeling to it. It's still very much riff-driven. It's a bit more aggressive than what they would do on Blood Mountain while being not quite as heavy, because, you know, that's the Earth album, this is the Water album. It makes sense. It's got a bunch of just super memorable fucking moments. I would say that this one, track for track, is a lot less consistent than Blood Mountain, but the tracks that are killer are fucking killer, and there's just moments that are, that stand out in any metal fan's mind. And then 13-minute fucking Hearts Alive is a fucking great track. The Age of Odds by Sufjan Stevens. I almost would have put Illinois on here, but that one I find... There's no Sufjan Stevens albums where I love every song. There's always kind of a pick and choose for me. And Illinois is a bunch of really great ones, but Age of Odds, I love just the insane maximalism of this album. I love the weird sonic palette of it, the digital experimentation. Like, Illinois has tons of instruments on it, and it's more like classical styled and like, more like a musicianship focused. This one's more focused on creating weird, unique sounds, and that resonates with me a little bit more. Songs like Impossible Soul is just so insanely ridiculous. It's a 25-minute song. It's a little repetitive. It's not a song I'd listen to all the time, but it's Impossible Soul. It's like, how can you not? I Want to Be Well is also a fucking epic track that just swells with so much emotion. Some tracks on there I just generally like. Vesuvius, the title track, Age of Odds. Don't love every song on it, but the ones I do, I really do. Andrew WK's I Get Wet, the party rock fucking album of the century. It's just very heavy, very straightforward pop rock songs about partying. If you love life and want to have a good time, if you want to throw a party with a bunch of psycho white guys with long hair who just want to fucking thrash while they're drunk, this is the album to throw on. Damn by Kendrick Lamar. This one, I warmed up to it more and more over time because it's just so fun to listen to. This is the throw-on Kendrick Lamar album. Like, To Pimp a Butterfly to me takes a little bit more concentration to listen to the whole thing and really enjoy it. But it does have, like, the tracks that I love from that album are just untouchable. Like, nothing on Damn is as good as, like, the top 4 songs on To Pimp a Butterfly. And you can still kind of throw on Good Kid, Mad City. Again, I think it takes a little more concentration, but Damn is very easy to just toss on in the background and be like fun hip-hop album with a rapper who I can't help but love. You know, I love how varied it is. I love that each song has its own atmosphere. You got tracks like DNA and Humble that are and XXX that are just fucking fun to listen to. Duckworth is a masterpiece. That's probably the best track conceptually, the most interesting story told. It's a mind blow of a song, and it's structured so fucking well. Songs like Lust and fucking Fear are some of the more interesting experimental Kendrick songs that still manage to flow well enough that you can just kind of listen to them. They're a little bit more casually listenable than like Dying of Thirst, Sing About Me, you know, from Good Kid, Mad City. So yeah, this is it's just a plug and play, get up and go Kendrick Lamar album. Not every song is necessarily amazing, but they're all fine. The Dot Hack Sign soundtrack, I obviously love it. I rapped over half of it for my fucking The World Over mixtape. You know, not every song is incredible. It is a fucking soundtrack, but all of the vocal songs are fucking great. Yuki Kajira is my favorite composer. Just something about the way she writes appeals to me a lot, and I liked it more before she was fully orchestral, back when she was playing more with digital instruments and combining sort of like a trip hop into her sound on this album. So yeah, I dig it. At Long Last, ASAP. This is one that I came to very late, and I've still never fully parsed it, because this album's interesting. It's a hip-hop album where every song is very, very different from each other. It goes to a lot of very different tones and vibes, and it does all of them well. Like, there's no song on here that stands out as like an amazing track. There's nothing that's like one of my favorite songs, but every single track is just really fucking solid at doing whatever it's trying to do. And so it's another just pleasant throw on in the background and chill out to album, almost comparable to like a Gorillaz album in a way, in the way that it's so varied. In fact, I think Damon Albarn is on this thing, so maybe he was going for that. Who knows? Opeth, Ghost Reveries. Everything I said about Watershed, you know, applies sort of here. It's not quite as consistent, but it has some of the most legendary Opeth songs. Fucking, the opening track, Ghosts of Perdition, is fantastic. Harlequin Forest is really fucking good. Baying of the Hounds is great, and Hours of Wealth has one of my favorite guitar solos in it. Just a fucking solid-ass album. System of a Down's first album. You know, I grew up listening to System of a Down pretty much constantly in my mom's car. It's her favorite band, and she listens to it all the fucking time. You know, in retrospect, like, I've gone back to these albums and listened to them again. I did a worst to best on them, which even since then, I've changed my mind a little bit on where I would organize the albums. But, like, yeah, their first album just has such a unique sound for being a nu metal album. Like, it's more playful, it's goofier. Surge has such a unique vocal presence. The song structures get really interesting and weird at times. I won't say every experiment pays off or is super interesting, but, you know, right when you start up this album, like, the opening riff is just so different from what you'd expect from this genre that it takes you on a journey. It's creative while also being heavy and pummeling and fun. And I love Surge's lyrical style on this thing. So, yeah, I think it's a solid, good fucking time. Isis Panopticon, I talked about it already, kind of. It's a little bit more post-rocky than Oceanic, a little bit more of a soaring kind of album. I don't put it on as much just because I'd rather listen to Oceanic, and I also think it opens in a really weird way. It just kind of opens almost in media res in the middle of a post-metal epic song. It's weird, but still really good. Not as distinct, but still a solid album. Snowing, Fuck Your Emotional Bullshit. This is 12 minutes, 5 tracks of just perfect fucking emo music. Emo, screamo, that kind of like math rock-ish emo, lo-fi, you know, just guys screaming about his emotions over some really technical sounding, pretty glistening riffs. You know, it's faster and heavier than, say, American Football, but it's that kind of sound, or like Cap'n Jazz. If you're into any of that, you gotta listen to this thing. You know, it's, again, very in and out. It's quick, it's easy, it's fun, it's a good time. Next up, fucking A Beautiful World. Is that what it's called? Fucking goddamn. Have a Nice Life. God damn it. I can't even remember. I'm gonna go look at it over here. Oh god, these are all slammed together. Have a Nice Life. The Unnatural World. Why the fuck did I think Beautiful? God damn, I'm gonna get killed for that. Anyway, The Unnatural World. The Have a Nice Life is, I would call them dark gaze. They're like a shoegaze band, except that everything sounds like death. They make you sound like you are going into a coma. But the songwriting's really good. I mean, Death Consciousness is sort of their more popular album, and that one's a little bit more varied, and it's a longer album, but I don't think as many of the tracks are as well constructed or as memorable as they are in this one. A lot of the songs on Death Consciousness just sort of feel like they created a tone and then they just kind of played it out for 5 minutes. This album is more like constructed songs while still having that dreamy, dissonant, falling to sleep quality to it. Both of them have been bedtime albums for me, but the Unnatural World is one that I would actually listen to while I'm awake more often than Death Consciousness. Clippings Mid-City, as I described earlier, really fucking harsh noise, hip-hop experimentation. It's a ton of fun. The sort of approach Clipping took on this album is like, let's like take each different type of hip-hop song and make a harsh noise version of it, and it's a lot of fun when you think of it in that lens. And just has a bunch of classic tracks like fucking Bout That and Get It and Loud. Definitely some of the earlier tracks are more memorable than the later ones. Not every song is amazing, but it's a fun album. System of a Down's Hypnotize. I had previously ranked this as my number one System of a Down album. I think I ended up putting The Hand above it just because it was... Even though I'd say this is even more unique in certain ways, like the songwriting is more of that like straightforward, every track is a single kind of thing that is, you know, comparable to a lot of my favorite albums, and I think that's what I like about it. But there's not the same like highs that The Hand reaches. It doesn't have the same level of like passion in it that I feel there, where like it feels like the band members it feels like they knew they were doing something really unique on The Hand, and at this point they're more like trying to craft their sound to a perfect like final form of it, I guess, on this one. The biggest problem really is the production. The production of this album is a little too chaotic, a little too muddy. Like the first 2 tracks, I really like the songs, but they just sound so fucking shitty that it's hard to listen to them. Even if I love the songwriting. But there's a bunch of fun tracks on here. Stealing Society is one of my favorite System of a Down songs. The later tracks, the way it goes from like heavier to more emotional and somber as it goes along. I love the flow of the album. I think it's really fucking solid, and it's returned to my fucking chart. Cities of Eve with Come to Life. He's a experimental hip-hop guy who sort of, his vocals are very Death Grips-esque, but the music is more electronically focused, more it's kind of noisy and kind of atmospheric, but a little bit more chilled out, a little bit more fun to listen to, more life-affirming, especially in the lyrical content. And it's an interesting experimental album. There's only a few really standout tracks. URL, IRL, and Head are probably the best ones on there. So not as much of it is super memorable as, some of the other albums on my favorites list, but it's definitely very unique. It has a very interesting tone to it. And if you like experimental hip hop, I recommend checking it out. Next up, I've got 2 Bus Driver albums in a row, Perfect Hair and Thumbs, which, Perfect Hair is more of a crafted album experience. It's another one where every song is very different, but they're all very fulfilling. They all have their own unique subject matters. Bus Driver is a phenomenal rapper. He's just got a really interesting voice. He raps about really interesting things. His production is kind of all over the place. Sometimes he produces himself, sometimes it's other people. Sometimes it can be a little obnoxious, but there's a lot of really creative and interesting songs on here, and I think that it's a lot easier to listen to than his earlier albums were. And then you got Thumbs, which is not as consistent in the songwriting as Perfect Hair, but I think both the highs and lows reach higher and lower, sort of. And songs like Ministry of the Torture Couch or fucking Worlds to Run are just some of the best Bus Driver songs, the most pleasing to listen to. Overall, I love them both. I would probably compile my favorites from both and make a different album out of it and be like the ultimate Bus Driver record. Some other songs from other albums can come too. To Kill a Friend, the first of the Shinsei Kamate-chan albums. It's short, succinct. It's only 8 tracks. They're all killer, except for maybe the last one. The first 4 are definitely the better half of the album, though, and are all super fucking memorable. They definitely laid the foundation of what their sound was going to be going forward, and unfortunately, everything after their 4th album just kind of sounds like retreads of those 4 tracks. But, they really made a name for themselves with a very unique take on the classic rock and roll formula with this album. So, check that out. Oblivion Access by Lil Ugly Mane. This is when Lil Ugly Mane went full experimental, just started making weird fucking noises, songs that are comprised of just tortured, disjointed pieces. The whole album sounds like it was recorded in a sewer. It's dismal, it's grotesque, it's emotional, and I love it. Songs like Collapse and Appear are some of my favorites. Leonard's Lake is really interesting. Opposite Lanes is probably the most just like straightforward, like actually listenable in your car kind of song on the album. It gets really fucking tortured as it goes, and when I'm feeling some type of way, it's a good accompaniment. Next up, we have the Eulogy by Cakes Tequila. This is just some really like aggressive but fun and quirky hip hop music that's heavy, but also there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of different sort of feels. Cakes Tequila is very aggressively, openly gay, and he probably makes the most just fun, like straight up like songs about being a power bottom that I've ever heard. I fucking love his whole style, and this album's one where like. Another one where like the best songs are some of my favorite songs ever, like Goody Goodies or Keep It Coochie, Fuck Your Boyfriend, and The Eulogy are probably like the 4 like god tier songs in this album. All the other stuff is hit or miss. Some of it I could really take or leave. Again, they're all very different from each other, which makes it an interesting listening experience, but like the best far outweighs the other stuff. Similarly, how I feel about Bath's Obsidian. Miasma Sky is a fucking incredible track. This is electronic, atmospheric singer-songwriter music. It's I guess I would call it like electronic pop music, but with a very atmospheric feel. Very layered sort of soundscapes that are very beautifully produced, very detail-oriented, and Bath's sings about some bad romances, songs like No Eyes I really love. He says, and it is not a matter of if you love me, but it is only a matter of come and fuck me. I fucked that up a little bit, but yeah, it's there's some really great memorable tracks with really great lyrics on this thing. It's hit or miss overall, but the hits are very strong. Next up, Tool's Ainima. Again, Tool, I talked about them plenty last time. Ainima is a longer album with a lot of tracks. It's a little more hit or miss. There's moments that aren't as memorable as others, but the singles, the tracks that everybody knows from this album, like H, Stinkfist, Ainima, the title track, all fantastic. Third Eye is a great drug song, lengthy, experimental kind of piece. There's a lot of weird interim tracks on here, a lot of like goofy memes and stuff to kind of break up the seriousness of their music, which I appreciate. I think it's a dope album. Weezer, Pinkerton. Found out about this from May because I had never really listened to it. I knew Weezer for, their better singles, but Pinkerton is the album with no singles, but nonetheless, every song is fucking killer. Aside from the final track, which I don't like that much, but it's just a bunch of super memorable fucking songs. Tired of Sex is a great power pop punk rock opener with a fucking massive riff. Songs like El Scorcho, Pink Triangle, fucking Across the Sea, all really memorable. You know, I haven't been listening to this for that long, but I've gotten a lot out of it so far. Gorillaz, Plastic Beach, again, Gorillaz, detail-oriented, experimental hip-hop and pop and art, rap music that involves lots of different co-stars. This is the album where Damon Albarn really started sort of pushing himself into the background, bringing out a lot more guest features. I love how just colorful this album is, how much variety there is. You know, I would say in some ways it's better than Demon Days in that it has even more going on, but there's just fewer tracks that have stuck with me the way they have on Demon Days, but nonetheless, a great fucking album. Next up, Kel Valhall, new introductory lectures on the system of transcendental Kabbalah. This is a weird fucking experimental electronic and hip hop album, I guess. From a guy who used to be like a digital black metal producer. So it's a very different take on going into the hip-hop genre. A lot of the songs on here are just like weird experiments, but there's two big, long tracks that are the sort of crux of the album. You've got Ontological Love, which is a 10-minute trap experiment that transcends space and time and lifts your soul out of your body. And then you've also got New Stage, which is even more pummeling, even more experimental kind of track that both are fucking great. Those two alone put this album on my favorites list. And then Oliver's Chlorine, which was my favorite album of 2017 at the time. It was the soundtrack to my relationship starting. It's basically an album about being an internet famous music producer and getting your long distance girlfriend to come over to your house and hang out for the summer. And just writing a bunch of sort of sweet, auto-tune heavy, crooning, kind of emo rap songs, but with an uplifting vibe. It's like sad boy music that's not sad because life is going good. And, you know, it's got that cloud rap atmospheric vibe. I really dig Oliver's sound. I don't think that any of the songs are like super amazing standout. He's not an amazing rapper. He's definitely gotten better since this album. He's been dropping more just individual songs as opposed to projects for the most part, but Chlorine was a great project, and I hope he releases another compilation of his good songs. He's become basically a weeb rapper now, because all he does is fucking sit around and watch anime on Netflix and Hulu, I guess, and rap about it. So that's pretty hilarious. There you go. That's my top 100 favorite albums for now. The one that I mentioned earlier that I forgot that should have been on here was Awaken My Love by Childish Gambino. A fantastic... almost like a prog rock soul album. It's like a psychedelic neo soul funk thing. The first half of that album is really fucking great. The second half I could kind of take or leave. Everything up through Redbone, or California rather, is really good. It has, you know, Redbone, Zombies, California, all my favorites. The opening track, Me and Your Mama, all amazing songs. What would I take off to put it on here? Oh boy. I don't know, maybe Obsidian by Baths, just because when I really think about it, there's not a ton of songs I really love off of that album. So that would probably be the one I'd replace. But yeah, Awaken My Love could be on here. Hopefully I didn't forget anything else. This took fucking forever and now my eyes are bleeding. Thanks for listening. See you next time.